Hello, everybody. How are you? Hi, Dolores. Hi, Kay. Hey, Steve. That's Stephen Wolfbrand. And hi, Steve Gonzo. Perfectionism is the voice of the oppressor. And Dia Swift says good evening. Hi, Dia. Bonnie says hi, everyone. Okay. Hope you're all having a nice evening tonight, given what's been happening. And hi, Lana. Dia says, wow, those are some snazzy alien sound effects. Where are those alien sound effects coming from? I wonder. I don't know. I've got everything turned off as far as I know. So it is a puzzle to me. But, okay, let us get on with checks. What's happening with checks? Well, the momentum on checks seems to have slowed down somewhat, I think. Let's look at a piece from, I picked it up at Reader Supported News. Comes from The Appeal. It's by Jay Willis. And his headline says, Joe Manchin's voters aren't letting him stop $2,000 checks. So what happened there is Corbin Trent's PAC responded to Joe Manchin saying, when it came to the details of Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID-19 stimulus proposal, Joe Manchin said, absolutely not, no. When he was asked by the Washington Post if the party's top priority should be sending out 2,000 stimulus payments, a pledge that Biden and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and a multitude of other Democrats made repeatedly on the campaign trail in Georgia. Getting people vaccinated, that's job one. But sending out $2,000 stimulus checks, that was a promise. Now, there's a bit of ambiguity about this promise, but there wasn't in Georgia when Biden repeatedly mentioned $2,000 checks. And the candidates did too. Biden said, if you vote for these candidates, $2,000 checks are coming out. Here are people waiting for $2,000 checks to pay rent, to buy food. $2,000 checks, are coming out. When the interviewer of Joe Manchin pointed out that his position placed him directly at odds with the party leadership, he said, quote, that's the beauty of our whole caucus, unquote. Quote again, we have a difference of opinion on that, unquote. Some might not consider that very beautiful, Joe Manchin. He went on to explain he might back a more narrowly targeted round of checks if he could be persuaded the money would bring back some of the millions of jobs that evaporated during the pandemic. But then he went to talking about FDR, said, I don't know where in the hell the 2,000 came from. Quote, can't we start some infrastructure program to help people get them back on their feet? Do we have to keep sending checks out? For the 1.8 million West Virginians he represents in Washington, that's not a rhetorical question. An infrastructure job soon is of little use to a family that needs to buy groceries last week. West Virginia is among the nation's poorest states. More than half of West Virginians are now struggling to cover their basic expenses, according to the Census Bureau. Joe Manchin is the most conservative member of the Democratic caucus. The caucus has to be united because it can't get any Republican support. So his opposition to sending out checks signaled to many that Biden's proposal, Biden's promise, was effectively dead before members of the 117th Congress would even have the chance to vote on it. Manchin's constituents wasted little time expressing their feelings on the subject. Now, the backlash was swift, and vocal. People of all stripes and all over the states were saying, this is the difference between whether or not my family gets to stay in their home. This is the difference between whether my small business gets to stay alive. This is the difference between whether or not I get glasses, unquote. Too bad they didn't think of things like that when they were voting in the primary, choosing between Joe Manchin and Paula Jean Swearengin in 2018. But no, they didn't think about the fact that Paula Jean Swearengin was going to be a lot more likely to deliver relief to them if it was necessary than the stingy Joe Manchin. They didn't think about that in 2018. They just voted for old Joe Manchin, who'd been around West Virginia for years and years and years, delivering nothing for nobody. In Beckley, West Virginia, a billboard went up portraying a bewildered-looking Manchin next to, quote, "Hey, Joe, where's my $2,000, unquote. And just as importantly, that quote was right next to his office's phone number. Radio ads mocked him for accomplishing the rarest defeats in Washington these days, being out of step on an issue with both Trump and his Democratic counterparts. Our Senator Joe Manchin thinks he knows better than both our president and the Democrats in Congress, the narrator said. And quote, "I guess Joe just don't know what it's been like to live through the pandemic," unquote. Quote, "I think that it was important that we not equivocate on something that was core to the message that won us Georgia and the Senate," says No Excuses PAC co-founder Corbin Trent, whose group paid for the ads that he narrated himself. That's the No Excuses PAC. Quote, "And not to look like Democrats right out of the gate are full of shit," unquote. The message in some form or other got through. During an appearance on Inside West Virginia Politics last weekend, Joe Manchin again emphasized the importance of embedding trillions in infrastructure spending in a stimulus bill. But the precise distribution of direct payments, it seems, is no longer among his principal concerns. Quote, "Is there a way to target it? Maybe there's not," unquote, he said. Quote again, "But we got to get more money out," unquote. So there's a reversal here. It's a product of West Virginia's unconventional political landscape and the unique position he occupies within it. Voters in the state are not so much Democrats or Republicans as independent and anti-establishment. Although Trump won every single county in 2020 and beat Biden by nearly 40 points, the registered Democrats actually outnumber the registered Republicans. And nearly a quarter of voters are unaffiliated with any particular party. And after some 4 decades in state politics, Joe Manchin is now the lone Democrat elected to statewide office, a skilled retail politician who prides himself on eschewing the labels by which many of his colleagues define themselves. He voted for Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and he flirted with the idea of endorsing Trump's re-election bid. In an evenly divided Senate, his penchant for refusing to toe the party line makes him arguably the most powerful lawmaker in Washington. And by the way, potentially the most hated lawmaker in Washington. That's my view. Anyway, he got big backlash. Polling conducted by Data for Progress and the Appeal found that about 80% of all voters, including nearly three-quarters of Republicans, support a one-time distribution of $2,000 payments. And more than half support making the payments both retroactive and recurring until the pandemic is over. More than 50%. As it turns out, the economic devastation wrought by disaster that brought large swaths of American society to a grinding halt does not discriminate based on party preference. For lawmakers, performing bipartisanship when people are suffering doesn't burnish your independent bona fides. It just makes your constituents furious. That is something that Manchin can control. And so he listened to it, and he backed off his earlier position. There are some other quotes here in this article. But the important thing is that Manchin had to publicly retreat from his earlier unqualified opposition to the $2,000 checks. So let's get on with things. We next have the wisdom of David Sirota. Who, when talking about checks, gives us a reminder this never ends well. Signals of retreat on the $2,000 checks echo Democrats' disastrous surrender on the public option in 2009. There's a picture of Smokey Joe. On January 4th, Joe Biden made an unequivocal pledge, telling voters that by electing Democrats to Georgia Senate seats, you can make an immediate difference in your own lives, the lives of all people all across this country, because their election will put an end to the block in Washington on that $2,000 stimulus check. That money that will go out the door immediately to people who are in real trouble. Less than 4 weeks later, Biden is now pushing for $1,400 checks rather than using his election mandate to demand new full $2,000 checks. Democrats are now suggesting it could take at least till March to even pass the legislation. Go out the door immediately to people who are in real trouble? Where is that, Joe Biden? Biden is now responding to threats of Republican obstructionism by floating the idea of reducing the number of people who would even get the checks. Reuters reports that he is open to negotiating the eligibility requirements of his proposed $14,000 COVID stimulus check. That's a nod to lawmakers who have said they should be more targeted. The signals of retreat are happening even as new polling data show that the original promise for a full $2,000 survival check is wildly popular. That's the same 80% poll by Data for Progress I believe. Is that correct? Let's see. Yep. The good news is there's still time to reverse this trajectory. So now is not the time to give up hope and stop pushing. However, it all feels familiar. It's not just because it seems like Lucy pulling the football away from Charlie Brown at the last minute. It is because it feels like we've gotten into a flux capacitor-powered DeLorean, flown back in time, and dropped ourselves back into the year 2009. You recall that back then, Obama and Biden got themselves elected in the middle of an economic crisis after promising to pass a public health insurance option. Actually, they got themselves elected in 2008. It was a promise as clear and explicit as the $2,000 checks promise is today. Their platform was explicit in pledging that, quote, any American will have the opportunity to enroll in a new public plan, unquote. But then, over the course of the year, as Republicans in the congressional minority kicked and screamed, and that was a relatively small congressional minority, the congressional minority of Republicans is larger now. The administration ever so gradually started backing down, rather than using the election mandate to try to shame the GOP into submission. By the middle of the year, Obama said, quote, the public option, whether we have it or we don't have it, is not the entirety of healthcare reform, unquote. His Health and Human Services Secretary said that it was, quote, not the essential element of healthcare reform. That was Kathleen Sebelius, that gray-haired lady, white-haired lady. By the winter, Obama flatly lied, insisting, quote, I didn't campaign on a public option. And then by 2010, the Obama White House had killed the plan. Actually, they killed the public option prior to 2010. By the late fall of 2010, it was already dead. Even when they brought it forth in June of 2009, it was pretty dead. By then, it was such a feeble public option, it would have enrolled only 10 million people. In the committee, where the Democrats were in the heavy majority in Congress, they had already cut the heart out of the public option. Nancy Pelosi was so proud when she brought that out of the committee because it had a public option at all. She was so proud that she had managed that. So it still had the public option in it, but it would be very dangerous to the private insurers. But even that wasn't enough to get them on board, and with them the Republicans. I'm sorry, I digressed from Sorota's article here. Then by 2010, the Obama White House had killed the plan, and Senate Democrats refused to even bring it up for a floor vote when they had the chance. Soon after, voters delivered what Obama called a, quote, shellacking, unquote, in the midterm election. At least Obama was honest about that, right? One of the only times in his presidency. Anyway, effectively foreclosing on the possibility of transformative change during Obama's presidency. So a little more than a decade later, the public option fight should be a harrowing cautionary tale for Biden on both the policy and the politics. And by the way, Biden is promising the public option trick sparkle pony again, basically hinting that he might go through the same kind of drill again as Obama did. They love to lose, these Democrats. He had a front row seat in watching a bad faith Republican opposition kill a much needed initiative Well, I don't think that was needed. I think Medicare for All was needed back then. H.R. 676. Okay, and by the way, recently Jay Powell referred to that bill, okay, as a resolution. She said, that wasn't a real bill, but that was a resolution. I have news for her. When a resolution is introduced in the Congress, it's called H-Res something or other, okay, then a number. But John Conyers' bill in 2009 was H.R. 676, meaning it was a bill that could be passed. Now, maybe it wasn't as detailed or as good a bill as H.R. 1384, but it was the best bill by far in 2009, and had it been passed, we would have had Medicare for All then. Anyway, he had a front row seat in watching a bad faith Republican opposition kill a much needed initiative, and then use Democrats' failure to deliver it to win at the polls. Beautiful Republican strategy, right? It's what they do. It's what they do. It's like the fable of it's the turtle and the scorpion, isn't it? The scorpion hitches a ride on the back of the turtle or something, and he promises he doesn't have to worry. He's not going to sting him or anything. So the turtle gets him to the other side, and the scorpion stings him. And the turtle says, "Oh, why did you do that?" And the scorpion replies, "But because I'm a scorpion. That's what I do." He of all people should know that this story never ends well. It never ends well. But Biden doesn't know that. He's only had almost 50 years to learn that particular lesson. The question is, says Dave Sirota, can he and Democrats learn from the past? $2,000 checks initiative does not have to go down the same way the public option went down. The president and congressional Democrats do not have to do what weak-kneed, wimpy Democrats of the past have so often done. They do not have to negotiate against themselves, word parse their way out of campaign pledges, and delude themselves into thinking Republicans are good faith legislative partners. They could instead try to use their election mandate and the weakened state of the GOP to demand full survival checks rather than pretending that bad faith Republican senators have any standing to make policy arguments. By the way, they should also do this while the Republicans are all busy defending Trump in the impeachment trial, showing once again how awful they are to the American people. Showing, like Rand Paul did today, what a slimeball he is. They could remember the truism once voiced by none other than Karl Rove, the slimeball of all slimeballs, by the way, except for Trump, of course, and Barr. And I guess we were introduced to a whole number of other slimeballs in this last administration, who correctly said that when it comes to political capital, quote, if you don't spend it, it's not like treasure stuck away in a storehouse someplace. It is perishable. It dwindles away. Or to put this another way, which is kind of the mantra of the capitalist world, it's called grow or die. When applied to political capital, it means grow it or see it die away. In short, they could actually make an honest effort to wield the power they've been granted and give themselves the best possible chance to win the policy and the politics. But doing that would require a psychological shift. Biden and his party would need to unequivocally and unapologetically prioritize making material gains for the country, rather than prioritizing the kind of bipartisan comity and etiquette in Washington that Beltway pundits love, but that ends up stopping progress. But by the way, we haven't seen that kind of comity and etiquette in Washington since the early 1990s. When is Biden going to realize it's not the early 1990s? It's post-Gingrich time. It's post-Bush time. It's post-Obama time. And it's post-Trump time. Unfortunately, it's not post-McConnell time. So, going back to Dave's article, they have to choose which side they are on. And there is no middle ground. I completely agree with that. But of course, Joe Biden thinks there is a middle ground, and he keeps searching for it, as if the middle ground was Hernando's hideaway. Joe Biden won't be able to find Hernando's hideaway. It doesn't exist. There is no middle ground. Get with the program, Joseph. So, there were some interesting things by Dave Dayen when it came to politics. There were interesting things about COVID as well. But each of two posts he recently had, and I'm sharing the first now, had some interesting remarks on the political situation. I will not cover the vaccine rollout moves. That's a very good piece of the column, and I urge you to read it. It's well worth reading. And I may decide to go over it tomorrow. I'm not sure. But I want to get to the section here called How Do You Spell Relief? Judging from yesterday's phone call with the White House, and by the way, this post called A Vaccine Rollout Moves Toward a Supply Snag was written on January 25th, published anyway, January 25th, just yesterday. Judging from yesterday's phone call with the White House, you don't spell it, quote, gang of 16, unquote. Centrist senators from both parties question the American Rescue Plan as being too generous to higher income Americans. Yeah, there was a phone call, at the White House that Biden had with 8 Republican senators and 8 Democratic senators. The centrist senators, the problem-solving types from the Senate, the gang of 16, we're now going to call them. They question the American Rescue Plan as being, quote, too generous, unquote, to hire Americans. The gang of 16 appeared more interested in funding for vaccine distribution, but that's only a portion of the $1.9 trillion bill. Dave says, this sets up well for the, quote, checks and shots, unquote, strategy, which I covered a few days back here. Vaccination money can clearly get a supermajority in the Senate. Okay, the direct payments are incredibly popular in the country, polling at around 80%. It's a different coalition of the Republicans who support checks. Yeah, the right-wing nutcases in the society support the checks. But I can't see Democrats who really want that vaccine money denying cash payments for the American people. It seems to me that checks and shots gets you to 60 votes. You might need to target the checks a little more. Give them out to fewer people. But you could also just dare anyone to vote against an 80-20 proposition. You could, and that is what you should do. But you got a problem. And Dave doesn't mention the problem here. How are you going to get that bill to the floor? How are you going to get it to the floor if Mitch doesn't want to get it to the floor? There might be 20 Republicans willing to vote for that bill. But it'll never hit the floor because Mitch will want to protect his members of the Gang of 16 who don't want to vote on checks and shots. What are they going to do to stop it? They'll just say they're going to filibuster it. They'll just say they're going to filibuster it. And it'll never hit the floor. That's it. That's the connection between getting the checks, okay, and having the filibuster. So Dave goes on, he says, then you get the rest of the bill. Oh, I should make clear, this is a Dave Dayen column, not a David Sirota column. Then you get the rest of the bill through budget by reconciliation, which I went over last time I was on, which Senate Budget Committee Chair Bernie Sanders has already vowed to do. There's a short window between now and the week of February 8th when the Senate impeachment trial begins. I think the date is now set for February 9th. But Democrats should take it and put checks and shots on the floor. I completely agree. They should. If they can get the checks and shots to the floor. I completely agree with this strategy. It's a great strategy. Then let Bernie try to work his magic through a reconciliation bill. But I don't see how they get it to the floor if they cannot get the filibuster. So let's move on to the next of Dave Dayen's columns, the one for today. Most of this column is about the post office and Congressman Pascrell to Biden. Fire the Postal Service Board. And it's a very good column, but I won't have time to cover it, though, tonight. And I urge you to read it because it's well worth reading. And Bill Pascrell's efforts are very, very welcome. I will say one thing about it. He points out he sends out 4,000 Christmas cards each year. He says, we pay for that ourselves. That is, the senators do, out of their own private funds. My cards were delivered to the post office in Virginia on December 1st. Most of the people in New Jersey got their card in January. Took a month to get the cards there. Now, we had an interesting experience just yesterday. I got my $600 stimulus check. Now, Barney hasn't gotten her $600 stimulus check yet. I have no idea why. We filed joint tax returns. We live together. Only one address. I looked at the date of the stimulus check, or the survival check. It's actually a survival check, I suppose. And what did I see? January 6th. The date of January 6th. It's now January 26th. In what world does it take 20 days for a check to get to me by first-class mail? Now, this is no joke. I mean, it's okay for me. I can wait 3 or 4 weeks for a stimulus check or more. But some people were waiting on that check for food and for rent. They were waiting on that check for economic survival. And this frickin' post office and frickin' DeJoy couldn't get it out in a reasonable time. No reason why that shouldn't have gotten to us in 3 days. It's just outrageous. Yes, all the board governors should be fired, which is what Pascrell wants. Yes, they should. But in addition and besides, Postmaster General DeJoy should be prosecuted and jailed. And so should Donald Trump. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about the post office today. In the section he called the lightning round, Dave Dayen says, the Senate, Mitch McConnell backed down on his demand that the Senate's organizing resolution include language on keeping the filibuster intact. He tried to play it off that he got public assurances on the filibuster from Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, and that was enough for him. But they were already on record against any changes and will be until enough Republican obstruction changes their mind. The point is that Mitch wanted it in writing in the organizing resolution. Chuck Schumer would not give it to him, and so McConnell caved. So Dave sees this as a McConnell cave. That's his interpretation of it. But that's not the only interpretation. It's not the only interpretation. Of course, I want to emphasize that the opposition of some Democratic senators to getting rid of the filibuster is also opposition. In effect, is opposition to getting people $2,000 checks, to getting people Biden's full program. It's opposition to checks and shots, because checks and shots would be a lot easier to get if we had no filibuster. Dave Dayen thinks there are 60 votes for it and we can get over the filibuster because there are 60 votes for it. But I don't know that there are 60 votes for it. But I know damn well there would be 51 votes for it, because even if Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema and 1 or 2 other Democrats are against it, they're not. If it gets to the floor, they're not going to go on record as voting against it. Not with 80% of the American public in back of it. They're going to vote for it. They're going to cave like cheap suits, which is what they are anyway. Do cheap suits cave? Fold like cheap suits, whatever. Got my metaphors mixed up. So anyway, that vote has to be gotten to the floor. To get it to the floor, you got to get rid of the filibuster. And these people don't want to get rid of the filibuster because why? It cuts into their power. their power to grandstand and play, I'm the adult in the room, I'm the responsible one, to their constituents. I'm the independent. I'm independent of my party. You can trust me to vote my conscience, which is to say, I don't really have a conscience, so you can trust me to vote for what my donors want. Both of them are like that. Both of them are like that. So, tripping a light fantastic here. I'll share the next one. This is the opinion of what happened that is recorded by William Rivers Pitt at Truth Out. He says, in the novel To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee's protagonist, Scout, describes a Christmas day spent with her least favorite cousin. Quote, talking to Francis gave me the sensation of settling slowly to the bottom of the ocean, unquote. And Pitt says, this is how I have long felt about Senator Chuck Schumer, and the week's antics have again validated my sense that the man is and has long been chum in Mitch McConnell's Shark Tank. It is barely Tuesday, and already Schumer couldn't make a breakfast order without losing control of the narrative and his caucus. That's all this setting of the rules thing was, a breakfast order, the first legislative meal of the Senate session to set the rules for the remainder of the term. Senator McConnell got up with Schumer and demanded from his minority position that Democrats promise not to do away with the filibuster, a relic of the Jim Crow era that has been widely abused by Republicans since 2009. I think it was abused by them before that, but okay. At first, Senator McConnell looked like some grabby brat making exorbitant requests from the kids' table. Schumer threw the demand back in McConnell's face, and for a bit, everything stopped. Quote, without the deal in place, unquote, reported the Washington Post, quote, Senate committees remained frozen from the previous Congress, where Republicans held a majority, unquote. Quote, Mitch McConnell will not dictate to the Senate what we should do and how we should proceed, unquote, Schumer said on Sunday. That was on Sunday morning. Quote, McConnell is no longer the majority leader, unquote. It all sounded formidable enough. And then, like an entirely predictable thunderclap from a dark and stormy sky, Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, Democrats both, publicly repeated their unequivocal opposition to ending the filibuster. Democratic Senator John Tester chirped his agreement not long after, though he left the door open, to change his mind if Senator McConnell again turned the filibuster into an impenetrable wall. With that, Schumer's whole stand collapsed around him. It was no secret that these three senators did not support ending the filibuster. Did Schumer forget this when he squared off with Mitch McConnell? In any event, having no more need to extract promises of filibuster protections because the Democrats took care of that by themselves, notice how they negotiate with themselves all the time. Senator McConnell, quote, graciously, unquote, dropped his demand and let the rules process do its thing. So McConnell emerged from his preseason crunch looking like an adept diplomat navigating hard waters, a conciliator who drops demands and allows the process to work. Schumer, by contrast, tried to play a busted straight, apparently without knowing what cards he was holding. He did not have the votes to back up his threat to dissolve the filibuster. Senator McConnell knew that, but the new the new Senate Majority Leader must have misplaced those notes. This wasn't checkers versus chess or bringing a knife to a gunfight. This was Schumer bringing his simpering grin to a thermonuclear war. And once again, congressional Democrats find themselves outflanked and tangled in their own wire. A strong beginning from the Biden White House now seems like it happened months ago. This is only day 6 of the presidency. Or is it day 7? Anyway, quote, Mr. Schumer said little of his strategy for rebuffing Mr. McConnell, other than calling his demand unacceptable, reported the New York Times. Quote, the new majority leader seemed to let Democrats and Mr. Biden, a former longtime senator who has been reluctant to overturn the filibuster, simmer over Republican tactics, unquote. A leadership, baby. I can smell it from here, says Pitt. One of the strangest elements of this whole fiasco was the reaction last night by some of the network news stations. MSNBC specifically went with the breaking news banner, the music and the wild lights, with chyron headlines like McConnell defeated and McConnell backs down. It was breathlessly reported that all this had been a huge setback for the minority leader, a stinging defeat. Well, now, no. Senator McConnell managed to get Schumer to promise more than he could deliver. Watched as members of Schumer's own caucus cut the legs out from under him and then gracefully retreated with a laurel on his head for being so willing to compromise. Senator McConnell owned the narrative of this exchange from the beginning. And if he started out seeming like he was overreaching, he ended by leaving a sense of, quote, well, someone has to know how to do this job, unquote. Shrug, wink, see you next time. Quote, making a mockery of yourself empowers foes and demoralizes supporters, unquote. Josh Marshall wrote for Talking Points memo before the final deal was struck. Quote, politics isn't all policy literalism and parliamentary procedure. To do it right, you frequently have to see beyond those critical but thin elements. Having the old majority senators still running the committees weeks after the new Congress kicked off is making a mockery of yourself. Or rather, it is allowing Mitch McConnell to make a mockery of the new majority, unquote. In the wake of Donald Trump, the Republican Party is shattered and demoralized in a way not seen since the Barry Goldwater election debacle of 1964. Yes, the majority is enjoyed by Senate and House Democrats are razor thin, but they are there. More to the point, the fact that the voters have so thoroughly repudiated the GOP that Democrats now control the White House and Congress is a point of rhetorical strength all by itself. Who does Mitch think he is by using the filibuster to preserve the filibuster and block Senate Democrats from asserting their fairly won majority control? I'll tell you who Mitch thinks he is. He is one of the smartest, most utterly ruthless, and most tactically minded people in that chamber, regardless of his minority status. He thinks that, and he is right. Until Chuck Schumer and his disorganized caucus figure out how to deal with Mitch McConnell, scenes like this are going to play out with weekly regularity, and then it will be 2022, and the GOP will blame Democrats for nothing getting done, and then they will pick up seats in the midterms. How do I know this? I've seen it happen just like this too many times before, and so have you. Republicans have been running this kind of jam session since 1994, and it's high time someone got some garlic and a wooden stake. We've all seen how this vampire movie ends. Well, that was a brilliantly written column, wasn't it? Wasn't it not? So that's Pitt's interpretation. He thinks that Mitch won the day easily. And then there's also another piece from Truth Out Centrist Democrats Manchin, Sinema side with McConnell to protect the filibuster. That one is by Sharon Zhang. Not sure how she pronounces it. And it was published just today. And she says, since the new Senate convened for the first time last week, its new leaders, Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell, were stuck on a stalemate over the Senate filibuster. Now, McConnell was dead set on keeping it, while Schumer, with his newly found majority in power, would not cave on Mitch McConnell's demand to keep the filibuster. On Monday night, that stalemate ended. Schumer called it a win. We're glad McConnell threw in the towel and gave up on his ridiculous demand, said one Schumer spokesperson. We look forward to organizing the Senate under Democratic control and start getting big, bold things done for the American people. But at the end of the day, McConnell ended up getting what he wanted. Though he didn't get any promises from Schumer about keeping the filibuster, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, two moderate Democrats, have come out strongly against getting rid of it, effectively securing McConnell's demand to keep the filibuster. Democrats hold a majority, so they could have used the nuclear option to abolish the filibuster, but they needed all 50 senators to stand together on it. So on Monday, McConnell declared victory for his side. Today, two Democratic senators publicly confirmed they will not vote to end the legislative filibuster, he said in a statement. With the protection of the filibuster, Schumer and McConnell will share power in the same way the two parties did the last time the Senate was split down the middle in the 2000s. Quote, the legislative filibuster was a key part of the foundation between the Senate's last 50-50 power sharing agreement in 2001. With these assurances, I look forward to moving ahead with a power sharing agreement modeled on that precedent, unquote, said Mitch McConnell. So, this piece seemed to agree with Pitt's piece that this was a victory for Mitch McConnell because two Democrats, by caving, basically got him what he wanted, at least a verbal commitment that the filibuster was going nowhere and that Mitch would be able to use it. So next, in this rather long story, but rather important story, because it is the key to much of what is going to be going on. So here's the Common Dreams article today. And McConnell caves on filibuster after Democrats Manchin and Sinema reiterate opposition to scrapping, quote, Jim Crow relic. This one is by Jake Johnson. Okay, and so you have the basic facts. There were, when he got the statements from Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, then Mitch backed off his position, and Mitch claimed victory in a statement on Monday night, pointing to Manchin's statement and Sinema's statement. And he might have pointed to John Tester's statement as well. And there are other Democrats like Mark Warner and still some others who value the filibuster very highly. Dianne Feinstein is one, for example. With these assurances, the Kentucky Republican added, I look forward to moving ahead with a power-sharing agreement modeled on the precedent of 2001. Anyway, the Republicans seized upon the Democrats' fresh comments on Monday as proof that Schumer doesn't have the votes. And Manchin said to the Washington Post, "I will not vote to bust the filibuster on any condition on anything you can think of. If you can't sit down and work with your colleagues on the other side and find a pathway forward, then you shouldn't be in the Senate." And Sinema's office voiced a similar position, saying, quote, "Kirsten is against eliminating the filibuster and she's not open to changing her mind about eliminating the filibuster." And Adam Gentleson, a former Senate aide and public affairs director at Democracy Forward, who's the author of a very good book on the Senate, and recently appeared on Michael Moore's Rumble show to discuss that, said, quote, "But Manchin and Sinema said the same thing they've said before, that Senator McConnell didn't get anything from his threat to blow up the organizing resolution." Gentleson said of Manchin and Sinema, "By bringing them around to reform is and was always going to be a process that likely requires repeated GOP obstruction. Senator McConnell picked this fight, lost, and is now doing a little CYA. But New York Times columnist Ezra Klein argued last week that Democrats have no chance of passing the agenda they've promised if they don't kill the filibuster. Wrote late Monday that he's less certain than others that Democrats came away victorious from the early fight over the fight over the resolution. Quote, "Sinema and Manchin simply said what they said before on the filibuster. On that level, McConnell got nothing new," Klein noted. "But another way of looking at it is this. Senator McConnell engaged in the most blatant, ridiculous act of obstructionism imaginable. Instead of telling him if he kept it up, they'd take that power from him, key Dems reassured him they'd never take that power from him. I'd have much preferred to see this end by Manchin, Sinema, and other Democrats saying they didn't want to get rid of the filibuster, even on organizing resolutions. But if McConnell didn't cut it out, they'd have no choice." Absolutely, that's what they should have said. In a statement, Schumer's spokesperson, Justin Goodman, said that we're glad Senator McConnell threw in the towel and gave up his ridiculous demand. And we look forward to organizing the Senate, blah, blah, blah. But with the filibuster intact, Democrats will have a hard time passing legislation without some Republican support unless they're willing to aggressively use the budget reconciliation process, which requires just a simple majority. Senator Bernie Sanders, the incoming chair of the Senate Budget Committee, has repeatedly indicated, Bernie is doing this, has repeatedly indicated in recent days that he is prepared to utilize reconciliation to pass coronavirus relief and other key priorities. In an interview with MSNBC's Rachel Maddow that aired late Monday, Schumer said, "We can get a lot of the COVID bill done with reconciliation," referring to the $1.9 trillion relief package President Joe Biden proposed earlier this month. "That is something we will certainly use if they try to block this immediate COVID bill," said the majority leader. Without using reconciliation and with the legislative filibuster intact, Democrats would need the support of at least 10 Republicans to pass coronavirus relief or any other legislation. But many Republicans, including self-styled moderates, such as Senators Romney and Susan Collins, have publicly criticized Biden's relief proposal and signaled opposition to the nearly $2 trillion price tag. Following McConnell's cave on the organizing resolution late Monday, progressive voiced hope that continued Republican obstruction in the face of devastating pandemic and ongoing economic collapse will force Manchin, Sinema, and other skeptical Democrats to reverse their view on the filibuster. When conditions change, politicians' positions change. Ezra Levin, co-executive director of Indivisible, tweeted late on Monday, quote, "Want to end the filibuster? Pass good bills in the House, send them to the Senate, and make Sinema and Manchin choose between the filibuster and those bills." Senator John Tester, an opponent of eliminating the filibuster, signaled Monday that he could adjust his stance if Senate Republicans use the 60-vote rule to stonewall necessary legislation. He says, "I feel pretty damn strongly, but I will also tell you this, I'm here to get things done," Tester told the New York Times. If all that happens is filibuster after filibuster, by roadblock after roadblock, then my opinion may change. Biden has expressed a similar view concerning the filibuster. So, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? You've heard the two different interpretations of who won, okay, and of what it meant. There's no doubt that Sinema, Joe Manchin, okay, and maybe John Tester would not vote for the nuclear option, would not vote, okay, to remove the filibuster. That's what they think, okay, at this point. How do you get them to vote? Well, first of all, probably Tester would vote for the nuclear option because Manchin and Sinema have strongly declared themselves. So Tester's vote is not needed. So he doesn't have to come to the crossroads himself. He can vote along with the caucus, especially if Schumer puts pressure on him. And Schumer's the leader. He can put pressure. He can remove people from committee spots. He can use the kind of power they have in the House. John Tester is never going to shift over to the Republican Party. He couldn't exist in that party. He's never going to shift over there. I don't know whether Joe Manchin can shift over there. Some of this may depend on whether Trump actually goes ahead and starts the Patriot Party or whatever the hell he's going to call it. If he's going ahead with that and he's starting it, that practically guarantees a split in the Republican Party. If there's a split in the Republican Party and they join up with the Republican Party, they're not going to get committee spots. They'll be in a weak position. They won't be joining a majority. They may be joining a majority right now if they shift parties in response to disciplinary action by Schumer. But if Sinema switches parties, she can't be sure of getting the Republican nomination in Arizona because a Trumpist might get it. In Arizona, the chair of the state party is Kelly Ward. Kelly Ward, the Trumpist. Because of her, Governor Doug Ducey has decided not to run for governor again. And evidently not to run for the Senate either. He's dropping out. He doesn't think there's a place for him in the Arizona Republican Party anymore. Is there going to be a spot for Sinema? So Schumer's in a position to really clamp down on her and say, you want good committee positions? You're going to have to vote against the filibuster. That's it. I need the filibuster gone. Joe Biden needs the filibuster gone. We need that for his agenda. You don't get to keep the filibuster. You don't get the posture as an independent. I'm sorry. And Joe Manchin has to be told the same thing. We need pressure. Pressure has to come from the inside. It has to be rough. It has to be, look, this is not a free vote for you. This is a party discipline vote. In these talks with McConnell, you opening up your big mouth cut the legs out from under me when I was negotiating with McConnell. That's never going to happen again. That happens one more time, you lose your positions on committees. We need that kind of talk to them from Chuck Schumer. And remember, Chuck, you got a challenger in the primaries in 2022 coming up, a likely challenger. So you better start acting tough. But that's not the only place where pressure can be put, where it should be put. The other pressure is this. Corbin Trent means to run ads against Cinema 2 concerning the $2,000 checks. Concerning checks and shots. And getting checks and shots. What's necessary in those $2,000 check ads is also tie that to the filibuster. It has to be pointed out that even if Manchin and Sinema back off their positions on the $2,000 and say, oh, well, people need the money, we're going to give them the full $2,000. We're going to back the $2,000 checks. Even if they say that, by also saying that they're not going to vote against the filibuster, that's just another way of saying they're not going to vote for the $2,000 checks. In the current condition of politics right now, the way it works, the current setup of power, unless you vote, unless you're willing to vote to get rid of the filibuster, you are also against the $2,000 checks for people. You're also against the renewed unemployment for people. You're also against the rental assistance for people. You're also against the COVID relief because you won't allow the Biden program to be passed because you insist on keeping the filibuster. You insist that it's about your power. The filibuster gives you power. So you're telling your constituents, it's about my power. It's not about you getting the money you need to pay your rent and put food on the table, and you getting a safety net to keep you going during the pandemic and the aftermath. There's a new economic study out. It's from who's it from now? It's from The Collective. It's by Adam Hirsch and Mark Paul. It's from the Groundwork Collaborative.org. And it's called, How Much Emergency Relief Will It Take to Revive the U.S. Economy? It's a PDF. They estimate it's going to take between $3 and $4.5 trillion to revive the economy from the devastation of COVID. So, since that was written, $900 billion was passed and is on the books. Biden's program is $1.9 trillion. That's $2.8 trillion. That's still not enough. And it certainly would be a disaster if they cut back on the Biden program. It would not be enough to get us into a fully productive economy post-COVID. The danger now is to spend too little getting out of the hole that COVID has put us in. That must not happen again, Joe Biden. It must not happen again, Chuck Schumer. It must not happen again, Kyrsten Sinema. It must not happen again, Joe Manchin. It must not happen again, John Tester. It must not happen again, Dianne Feinstein. All you fiscal responsibility morons have to learn some modern money theory. You just can't be ignorant anymore. Your faux fiscal responsibility BS will not fly anymore. People don't care about it. What they care about is being able to feed their families and to stay in their homes. And that's your job number one, other than finally getting us out of the fix of COVID. That's your job number one. And you better do it. Or in 2022, it's bye-bye to many, 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 many of you. Kyrsten Sinema, you're running in a swing state. You're going to have a rightist, crazy Trumpist. And that person is going to accuse you of failing to deliver for the American people, failing to deliver checks, putting the filibuster before those survival checks. That's what's going to happen. You're not going to get a relatively polite Republican this time. You're going to get a really, really nasty Republican that's going to make Martha McSally look like Queen Elizabeth. You got to remember what you're going to face in 2024. If you screw up now, then Congress goes back to the Republicans in 2022. And there's going to be a Republican wave in 2024. And you won't survive that Republican wave. Because your dinoism is not going to be able to stand up against a Trumpist candidate on the other side. That's not going to happen. Especially because the Republicans are now maneuvering in the very Senate where you won't get rid of the filibuster. They're maneuvering to exonerate Trump so he can hold office again, so he can run in 2024, so he cannot be gotten rid of. These idiots. And Mitch is in that category too. Mitch wants in the worst way to make sure that Trump can't come back. And he can't get his caucus to convict him. So he can't come back. I mean, this is insane. It's just insane. In any case, the final point I want to make about the filibuster is that ads can be run by Corbin Trent in Arizona and in West Virginia over the next week or two, tying their defense of the filibuster to the failure of Democrats to get out those $2,000 checks and the necessary COVID shot legislation. That stuff has to get done by February 9th. And the bottom line is that by not getting rid of the filibuster, Sinema, Joe Manchin, John Tester, and the other members of the Gang of 16 on the Democratic side are delaying the checks and shots. They're delaying that from getting out. They're putting it into March because the impeachment trial starts on February 9th. They're putting it into March. And then the checks won't get to people, perhaps even then, because the post office is going to take 20 days. So what are we talking about? We're talking about big Democrat fail, F-A-I-L, fail to deliver on explicit promises. So that's it. Crunch time is now. It's not later. It's not when you decide you want to start the campaign for 2022, because people won't forget. If they get screwed again, the way they did by you in 2009 and 2010, there's no forgetting about it. I mean, the party's gone. You can kiss it goodbye. You can kiss it goodbye along with your butts. So, I'll stop sharing that. Sorry for all of the for all the fun you had with that one. I do want to get to the prosecution of Trump. I thought this was a very good piece by Ryan Cooper, who, as you know by now, is one of my favorites, one of my favorite columnists. This is a short column. It says Trump must be prosecuted by Ryan Cooper. This was done on January 25th. Will Donald Trump face any accountability for his apparent crime spree as president? Part of that question will be answered soon with the Senate trial for Trump's second impeachment. Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, will reportedly send over the article passed by the House on Monday, and while most Senate Republicans are likely going to vote to acquit based on a fake technicality, there will still be a vote. By the way, the technicality was raised today, and the vote was 55 to 45, against acquittal, with 5 Republicans going over to the Democratic side, which meant 45 of the Republicans, based on the technicality that Trump is already out of office and that impeaching him now would be unconstitutional. Of course, it isn't unconstitutional. The Constitution provides for prohibiting someone who is impeached from holding office again. But he's got to be impeached first, to do that. So they're saying that Congress doesn't have the right to impeach because Trump is no longer president. But the other argument is, no, we still have a right to impeach because we have a right to ensure that the person who committed these crimes while he was president cannot serve in high office again in the United States. That's basically the counter argument, and the fact that there's precedent for it. And so it seems like a technicality that's not going to hold up. In any case, the Senate has the sole authority over impeachment. There's no court that can gainsay what the Senate does, okay, in this particular instance. So it's up to the Senate, okay, to convict. It's up to the House to try. It's all within the power of Congress. It's unreviewable by the Supreme Court, okay, in this instance. The Supreme Court is not even doing its usual thing. The Chief Justice isn't sitting as the person who is presiding over the trial. Anyway, going on with the piece. The more important question is whether Trump will face ordinary legal liability. There are already calls for President Biden to pardon Trump. Most recently from Jonathan Rauch at Lawfare. He says, quote, if we want Biden's presidency to succeed, accountability to be restored, and democracy to be strengthened, then a pardon would likely do more good than harm, unquote, he argues. I just think that's an outrageous point of view. If you're saying that we have to avoid holding Trump accountable in order to restore accountability and democracy, you got to have a screw loose in your head. This is an astoundingly terrible argument, as Ryan Cooper says. Trump's monstrous presidency was in no small part the product of previous elite impunity, and he should absolutely face legal liability as any other citizen would in his place. As an initial matter, Rauch is extremely cavalier about whether or not we know everything about Trump's law-breaking. He says, quote, Trump is nothing if not obvious about his transgressions, he writes. He notes that Trump almost certainly committed obstruction of justice in connection with the Russia investigation and possibly committed sedition by sicking his mob of followers on the Capitol. But if, quote, he committed crimes we don't already know about, they're probably not of a new kind or magnitude, unquote. And Ryan goes on, only somebody who is staggeringly ignorant of the Trump canon could say something like this. Now, it is true that Trump is extremely blatant about much of his apparent law-breaking and violations of the Constitution. But the actual pattern with Trump's life story is that he is constantly doing terrible stuff right out in the open. And then, when somebody actually investigates any of it in detail, the truth is much, much worse. That was what happened when the New York Times investigated how he avoided paying almost any tax on his massive inheritance. It's the story of his business failures, how he stiffed his contractors, what he did with his money from The Apprentice, and on and on. It would be highly unusual for there to not be all kinds of scams and crimes in addition to the ones we already know about, even if there aren't. It would be nuts to not investigate anyway, just in case. Moreover, Rauch mysteriously does not mention several obvious apparent crimes. Blackmailing a foreign politician is illegal. Soliciting a bribe is illegal. Lying to a bank to get a loan is illegal. And on and on. Yeah, lying to Deutsche Bank to get a loan. Illegal. Again, it seems Rauch has not been paying attention to the news. Then Rauch complains that Trump would turn any trial into a media circus. Quote, that kind of spectacle would not bring the country together in recognition of Trump's misdeeds. It might instead sow even more division and delegitimation, unquote, he writes. Now, this may not even be true. In prior legal situations when Trump faced genuine peril, he has tended to quiet down somewhat and evade questions because he is a massive coward. He usually backs down when confronted with a determined, powerful foe. But more importantly, this argument amounts to saying that a sufficiently rich and powerful person should be able to get away with crimes if they can muster exuberant public support. It can safely be dismissed. But Rausch's, quote, strongest argument for the pardon, unquote, is the most mistaken of all. Here he invokes some classic American exceptionalism to further the cult of elite impunity. Quote, prosecuting an ex-president is a bridge the country has never crossed, unquote, he writes. Quote, the implications of seeing a former commander-in-chief in the dock are vast, profound, and unknowable, unquote. I have to say, when I think of Trump, I don't have an image of the former commander-in-chief standing strong. Because when I envision a commander-in-chief, I generally think of a tall guy in good physical shape, neatly decked out, and highly disciplined. And all I see in Donald Trump is an overweight slob with orange hair, exhibiting no discipline whatever. You can call him a commander-in-chief, okay, 1,000,000 times. But he is no commander-in-chief. He is a spoiled, fat slob-in-chief. Settling this precedent, quote, might just as easily set a precedent that presidents prosecute their predecessors, unquote. One feels like showering Rausch with a bucket of ice water. Hello, earth to lawfare. Trump was impeached a year ago for trying to gin up a fake prosecution of Joe Biden in the Ukraine. He was just too daft and incompetent to get away with it. He also, let us recall, sicked a fascist mob armed with flex cuff, guns, bear spray, and a gallows on the Capitol. And they were inside chanting, hang Mike Pence, further stoked their anger at his own vice president while he was mere feet away in hiding. This fussy hand-wringing about future presidents possibly abusing their power is peanuts compared to what Trump has already done. The fact is, the United States is a corrupt, rickety, and unstable semi-democracy, where one party out of two does not recognize the legitimacy of its political opponents. Contrary to Rausch's description of President Ford's pardon of Nixon as a, quote, wise and farsighted decision, one that served the cause of justice better than the prosecutorial process would have done, unquote. A large reason we are in that situation is because a whole generation of Republican criminals was allowed to evade legal accountability. If previous criminal presidents had been seen in the dock, Trump very likely never would have become president in the first place. I completely agree with that. Rausch says that Trump and Nixon are the only modern presidents to have been credibly accused of serious crimes while in office. But this is not true at all. George W. Bush openly admitted to ordering torture, along with half his top-level staff, while George H.W. Bush pardoned several of the Iran-Contra criminals when the investigation was closing in on his own role. Many of Trump's top staff were Republican lifers who avoided accountability right alongside their presidential bosses. One of the people deeply involved in the Iran-Contra pardon decision, for instance, was William Barr, who would go on to serve as Trump's attorney general and attack dog. If even a quarter of the Times reporting on his pre-presidential life is true, Trump should have been put away on several occasions for about every kind of financial fraud there is. When elites can commit crimes with impunity, then a nation tends to develop a case of moral rot, with nothing holding them back. The worst, most shameless, and most unscrupulous people worm their way to the top of society. People like Donald Trump, allowing him to get away with what he's done, will just make it clear to all the other aspiring despotic criminals that achieving high office is a ticket to being immune from prosecution. Lock him up. And that's the end of that one. And I can only echo it. Lock him up. And I guess I'd add, throw away the key. So, if you're still here, I guess a lot of you are, so thank you. I will begin to consider your comments. Let me go back to the beginning. Snazzy alien sound effects. It's cold in Los Angeles. Before you started speaking, there was a lot of weird noise. The weird noise comes from the fact that for a little while, to check that everything is going okay in Facebook, I have my Facebook on. And what I do then is I turn off the sound coming from Facebook, which stops the weird noise. That's probably what you were hearing at around the time you made this comment, Dia, K906. Kay says, not as cold as Northeast Ohio, Steve. Laugh out loud. Lana says, hello. Anthony smiles. Kay says, not as cold as Northeast Ohio, Steve. Laugh out loud. Dia says, I wish Joe Manchin's voters would kick out that fascist saboteur. They had a chance in 2018. They could have voted for Paula Jean Swearengin, a Bernie Democrat. She would have been a wonderful senator. Instead, he beat her in the primary in 2018. And then Shelley Moore Capito, that nonentity, part of the Republican Gang of 16, was returned to the Senate instead. Shelley Moore Capito has done nothing for her West Virginia constituents. Joe Manchin's done nothing for his West Virginia constituents. Both easily got elected. Paula Jean Swearengin was just ignored by the media there, by local media. She could never gain a foothold. She was beaten soundly by Shelley Moore Capito in 2020. She ran twice. Would have made a great senator. Really fine person, school teacher, fighter, really cares about people. I mean, what can you do if people won't seek out information about who they're voting for and compare them to who's running against them? I mean, what can you do? Steve says Mike Pence is homeless and bouncing between couches of Indiana politicians. Really? That's amazing. And Dia says, is Manchin and Sinema vote with McConnell to keep the filibuster important? Aren't those two in the wrong party? Yeah, those votes are important because they're Democrats, and there are 50 Democrats in the Senate now. So unless you know some Republicans who are coming over to the Democratic Party, yeah, their vote is very important because the vice president has to break a 50-50 tie, and they're the 49th and 50th votes. Yes, they are in the wrong party, but the point is that maybe they are in the right party. If Trump starts his party, and there's a really crazy right-wing party out there, that's going to split the base of the Republican Party in half. And that's also going to create a situation where the Democratic Party is going to tend to split, okay, as well. Okay, and Trump says he could kill someone, okay, and get away with it. Yeah, he said that, but that was when he first was running way back. When he was running for office, he was saying, yes, he could do that in the street. He hasn't quite done that. Instead, he sicked a bunch of crazy people on the Capitol, and he caused the death of 5 people indirectly. And Kay says, shared. And Diaz says, yeah, I need glasses too. Steve Wolfbrand said, well, that's what happens when you marry your cousins in West Virginia. Diaz says, but Manchin is Klan, but no doubt about it. You really think so? I don't know if he's Klan, but anyway. Who the hell wants to work on infrastructure and such when new COVID variants are running amok? This country needs to go on lockdown. Actually, if people are working outside, that's probably safer than if they're working in restaurants or working in meatpacking plants, stuff like that. So, Kay says Joe Manchin is bought and paid for a dino. He is. Evelina says there's background noise, I think. Steve Wolfbrand says cue the banjos. Diaz Swift says Senator Markey said 2,000 every month till COVID ends. Yep. And more important, Lee, that's what's in the Automatic Boost for Communities Act, the ABC Act, jointly introduced by Rashida Tlaib and Pramila Jayapal. And it's going to be introduced again in this Congress. Okay. Kay says, none here, Evelina. Sandy Dick says, share. Hiya, Sandy. Sandy says, hello. Evelina says, it's gone. But Dia says, I'm super worried about the Beck lawsuit, soon to be heard by SCOTUS, which will give the stolen election dolts new fuel once the DNC is exposed. Well, it may give them some new fuel, but they really do need to be exposed. They need to stop the crap. But whether SCOTUS is going to do it or not, I don't know. The lower courts have ruled that the DNC has the right to cheat. Now, whether the Supreme Court will overturn that or not, I can't say. But 2 things I do think. The fact that the DNC cheated in the primaries doesn't mean it cheated in the election of 2020. And the second thing, certainly the Supreme Court is not going to affirm a right to cheat in the general election. And they may overturn the current finding that since the DNC is a corporation, it has the right to cheat the voters in their primaries. It seems to me that's like customer fraud. So, but it seems to me it's obvious. It's just fraud on a customer, holding out a contest and saying it's an honest contest and fixing it. I mean, that's a fraud. It's not similar to pro wrestling, where everybody knows it's a fraud. It's intended to be a fraud. Everybody knows it. They treat it like a game or some kind of comedy show, something like that. But the primary elections are supposed to be deadly serious contests. Sandy says Biden is a giant turd. Dia Swift says soon to be heard by SCOTUS. Fixed it. Steve says Back to the Future. Evelina says, so when are Americans getting their stimulus check next summer? I don't know when the next one is going to come out. Steve Wolfbrand says February 31st. Evelina says Steve Wolfbrand, okay, another month. JK, I think we're looking okay at April. Yeah, we may be looking okay at April. I mean, until the post office gets to us, even if it passes like the first week in March, it may not be till April Fool's Day that we get it. Kay says, Evelina, they need to let Bernie handle it or we won't get it, okay, at all. Well, They need to get rid of the filibuster. If Bernie handles it, okay, his reconciliation, there's no way it can get done in 2 weeks. Can't get done by February 8th. So if he handles it through reconciliation, it's going to get done. But with the delay that comes with the trial, it's probably not going to pass until the first or second week in March anyway. So Alana says, so the Supreme Court is now going to hear the Beck's lawsuit? Steve Wolfbrand said April 1st, or Sandy Degg asked if Steve Wolfbrand, April 1st. And Dia Swift said, yes, Lana. I thought the article said heard by SCOTUS, but I could have misread that. Joanne says, hi. Hiya, Joanne. And Sandy says, so Sandy sent some icons, which I am not able to read in this interface. Steve Wolfbrand said, I have no idea. And Dia Swift says, Biden wants to be Obama's white shadow. I forgot about that white shadow. Sandy says, April Fool's Day would be appropriate. And Joanne says, spent my relief check in 1 day. Whoop, whoop. Kay says, Joanne, I spent most of mine on glasses that I need badly. Boy, those must have been expensive glasses. Where'd you buy those glasses? Dia says, Republicans are snakes. You can comfort a snake, but he's still going to bite. Now, Republicans are scorpions. They're still going to sting. And Lana says, what did Rand Paul say today? Okay, I missed it. He made the Republican case for why this impeachment of Donald Trump is unconstitutional. That's what he said. He said it was unconstitutional because Trump, okay, is out of office. Chuck Schumer answered him immediately, and I don't think I was biased when I say Chuck Schumer had a far more convincing case than Rand Paul. And Joanne said, shared. Thank you, Joanne. Steve Gonzo said, care to weigh in on Jimmy Dore's Boogeyman interview? I don't know if I saw a Jimmy Dore's Boogeyman interview. I'm not even sure what you're referring to. And Kay says, I went to the cannabis dispensary. Oh, I'm sorry. Joanne said to Kay, I went to the cannabis dispensary. All stocked up on cannabis. Oh, wow. Steve said, I thought it was good. Evelina says, they'd rather see people die. Kay says, Joanne, nice. And Charlie Panillo said, we can't be puppets of China, communist, Biden, Congress. Judges are districting your country and your lives for the destruction. I can see we have a guest who may be a Trumpist. Dia Swift says, it's like Democrats are in an abusive relationship with Republicans because they don't have the courage to get out. So they can blame their incompetence on their abusers. Steve Gonzo says it's cheaper to hire new, not dead employees than pay health care. Yeah, I guess they think so because there's high unemployment. People need jobs to do almost anything right now. Democrats continue to try to win over Republicans, but they get bit every single time. Well, as you know, I advance to the proposition that they'll get bipartisanship out of the Republicans once they've beaten them to a thorough pulp and the Republicans realize they cannot beat the Democrats, so they might as well advocate for the same policies and see if they can get elected as a Democrat like Dwight Eisenhower did and Richard Nixon did when he first started out and Nelson Rockefeller did in New York State. There were a whole bunch of people who today would be referred to as Republicans in name only back then. Back then they were known as the modern Republicans or the Eisenhower Republicans. Unfortunately, the modern Republicans then regressed under Reagan to the 1890s Republicans, which is what we've been living with ever since. Except I think the Trumpists have regressed to the Southern Democrats of the 1830s. K. Clark Ryan says, all the new policies Biden is doing can be undone just as easily. We need real laws. Kay says, he and other Dems need to act like they won. Steve Wolfbrand said, I thought Mitch doesn't run the show anymore. He will not run the show if they can take the freaking filibuster away. Sandy says they need to do away with the filibuster. Right, Sandy. Absolutely right. Dems need to push hard left, not right or center. Sandy says, I guess they forgot to tell Mitch. Yeah. Yeah, Mitch. It's very clear that Chuck Schumer is the chum in his Shark Tank, and that he can always get the best of little Chucky Schmucky. And Evelina says, I read Schumer let go of filibuster by giving in to pressure from his home state due to primaries coming up. He'd like to let go of the filibuster, but unfortunately he needs all 50 Democrats to do it. Anyway, Republicans just voted overwhelmingly that the impeachment is illegal. Yes, what damn impeachment trial? Democrats are just going to lie down. The Republicans may have voted overwhelmingly that the impeachment case is illegal, but they lost that vote by 55 to 45. Okay, now among themselves, it was 45 to 5, yes. But in the Senate as a whole, it was 55 to 45. So the trial continues to go on, okay? And the House Democrats are going to prosecute him. I don't suppose there's much chance, okay, that another 12 Democrats are going to shift over. That would probably be too much to expect. Okay, the chances are small. But hopefully, this will produce a record that gets out into the press and witnesses that get out into the media as well, and that help to turn sentiment against Trump while the trial is going on, and feed the criminal trials and the civil trials that may go on later. Claudette says, keep your shots. If the checks depend on the shots for the money, then I don't want either. So Claudette wants to do without the shots. She wants the rest of us to take the shots and get the herd immunity while she sits at home and doesn't take those shots in order to protect herself, and she hopes the rest of us are going to bear the burden to eliminate the risk from her. Very public-spirited of you, Claudette. Sandy says, I didn't get my card. And Joanne says, Senator McConnell could not handle standing long in a filibuster. That's true. Maybe the reform that they should put up for the filibuster is to see if they can get a 55 to 45 a filibuster. And then make the people who want a filibuster stand up. That would probably completely de-weaponize the filibuster in the Senate. The only reason why it works now is because people could just declare their intention to filibuster, and that counts as a filibuster because of the reforms that were made by Byrd in 1974. Joanne says, Sandy, we got ours just yesterday. Steve Wolfbrand said, my company is getting payments mailed 6 weeks ago. It's a mess. Padilla says, they're hoping for civil war, hence the delay of the $600 checks. And Lana says, my sister sent Christmas box on December 10th and just got here prior to That's really Pride and New Year's Eve. Yeah, 20 days, Pride and New Year's Eve. Sandy said they sat on the mail. Lana says, I feel bad for the post office workers. And Charlie Pinot said, we can't be puppets of China. Said that again. You said that before, Charlie. You a robot. Dia says, the court stopped Biden's executive order to deport innocent migrants. How in the hell is that even possible? I don't know. I didn't read that. I don't know how they can stop his executive order. Oops, to stop deportation. I'm not sure what you said, Dee. I'm not sure what was stopped. In other words, did they overturn his executive order, Biden's executive order, or did they overturn Trump's executive order? And Dia says, oops, to stop deportation. What conscience? Frickin' haters, backstabbers, their clan. That's why they're aiding with McConnell. Steve Wolfbrand says, Schumer sucks and his pudgy, unfunny daughter as well. That's not his daughter. I believe that's his niece. Amy Schumer you're talking about. I believe that's Chuck's niece. I don't think it's his daughter. Barbara Werner says, watching Democrats play these ridiculous games is just exhausting. Everyone is onto the fact that it's theater. They look so pathetic. And Kay says, but Dems are a pussy party. Shake my head. Kay, do not say anything so sexist. Kay says, let Bernie handle it. Shake my head. Dia says, but what else can you expect when Schmucky openly courts Republicans over progressives? I don't know. He sure put up a weak candidate against Mitch, a terrible candidate. By the way, Susan Collins is mad at him because he put up Sarah Gideon, to run against her, in Maine. So she has a grudge against Chuck Schumer now. She doesn't understand that she was lucky that Chuck didn't put the progressive Betsy Sweet up against her with all the support of the DSCC in Maine, because Betsy Sweet might have beaten her. Sarah Gideon was too stupid to run on a progressive platform. That's why she lost. Otherwise, she would have beaten Susan Collins too. Steve Wolfbrand said, those are some nice mittens Bernie's got. Joanne says, snow in Tucson this morning. Are you enjoying it? And Steve said, snow in Malibu yesterday. Very unusual.
Yeah, nice.
Was there any snow, in LA yesterday? I asked that because my daughter hates the cold. She really does. She really hates it. Steve Gonzo says, reboot. Reboot? And Dia says, yep, Romney is crying, borrowing disinformation. Yeah, borrowing from China, borrowing from our grandchildren. Tell you what, Mitt, don't borrow a thing. Just use overt congressional financing. Just use that. Order the Fed to top up the Treasury General account. That's all you got to do. I got 2 sentences for you, Mitt. 2 sentences. You don't have to borrow a thing. In fact, the first sentence takes care of the deficit spending. The second sentence pays back the debt as it falls due during the period of the appropriation. If you vote for that, it'll pay down the debt. You won't have to worry about it anymore, Mitt. Dia Swift says, now that Leahy is sick, who is presiding over impeachment? I didn't know Leahy was sick. Since when did he get sick? I just saw him. I saw him there this evening. I mean, whenever they had the proceedings today, I saw Leahy sitting in the chair. He was wearing a mask. There was no indication he was sick. But probably the one who would preside over it would be the most senior person of the Democratic Party other than Patrick Leahy, the one who was served the longest. I'm afraid that might be Di-Fi. Oh, God, that would be awful. If it were Di-Fi, that would be awful, wouldn't it? I hope it's not Di-Fi. I mean, I think Di-Fi's lost it. I don't think she could serve. I don't think she could serve in that capacity. I don't think she's capable of actually presiding over the impeachment trial. I mean, she might go around and hug Lindsey Graham again. Joanne says, Steve Wolfbrand snowed once in my 35 years in SFV. Santa Fe, SFV, I don't know. And Dia Swift said, I did see a Patriot Party registration document yesterday. Not sure if it was legal. Dia Swift, Biden needs Manchin and Sinema gone. Well, not right now. He needs their votes. And he needs them to vote to get rid of the filibuster. Dia says, Schmucky is bending over as we speak, waiting for his favorite McConnell spanking. He loves it. He's a freak for pain. Steve Wolfbrand said it's very rare, but it happens. South Central had a weird snowstorm about 10 years ago. Lana says, wow, I just looked up Leahy was rushed to the hospital 4 hours ago. Hope he will be okay. I hope he will be okay, too, because they really need him there in the Senate. I hope he'll be okay anyway, but, you know, just looking at it, okay, from the political point of view, the Democrats cannot afford to lose a vote in the Senate right now. Steve Wolfbrand says, I want to get vaccinated. Lana says, looks like he went home from the hospital. Hopefully that means he's not very sick. Kay says, Feinstein needs to retire now. Kay says, yeah. Steve says, she has dementia. Kay says, I know, Steve. It's sad, Kay. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. Is there another country that will take us where we can keep, our SS? Well, you can keep it if you can get it from the U.S. government. There are many people living on their Social Security in Thailand and other low-cost countries. Dia says, we just cannot have Trump fascism in 24. Well, if we intend not to have Trump fascism or something like it in 24, we have to kick the butts of the Democrats right now and get them in line. Steve Wolfbrand says, Mexico, Costa Rica. I think I'd probably prefer Costa Rica, wouldn't you, Steve? And Kay says, me neither, Steve, but she needs to go. Barbara Wernick says she just filed to run again. It's not even discussed on the news. And everyone knows she's burnt, but she will keep going. Kay says, come and get me, Steve, and let's go. Sherry Wise said, so sad what we've become. Me too. And Dia says, when is Letitia James going to drop the bomb on Trump? All that threatening, yet silent since he left the White House. That means she's preparing the case. She doesn't have to make threats now. She's preparing the case. She's writing it up. Dia says, stupid schmancy. Only one charge on Trump. It's not enough. Well, that's a pretty obvious charge, though. But I do think, it was not enough. But she wanted to do something fast. And I guess she didn't want to take the charges that were coming out of the squad. I think the squad had quite a few charges that were written up there. Sherry Wise says people at higher levels of government and business really need to start being held accountable. You betcha they do, Sherry. You betcha. Steve Wolfbrand said, you're killing me, Doc. Laugh out loud. Barbara Wernick says, laugh out loud, an overweight slob. I just laughed out loud. Padilla says, I wish Barr could be prosecuted and sentenced for helping the slob, but Donald. God. Well, okay, I ordinarily wouldn't make fun of the appearance of people. I really dislike that, okay, and I really stay away from it. But I have to admit, I hate Trump so much that I just can't help it. I just can't help it. I hate him so much. He's so evil. He's just so evil. I mean, I just can't help it. Sometimes I just got to call him names. I mean, I know it's a terrible practice, but I'm only human. After all, I'm only human. And Dolores Pierce says, Trump was so horrific in the 4 years of office, yet a huge fear exists of him holding office again by crooks who have held office for decades. Is kind of ironic, laugh out loud. Electing Biden with a decades-long history of corruption to oust the 4-year corrupt Trump is also ironic. Stupid is as stupid does. Yeah, that's true. Cases, I'm afraid this country is a failed state for too many reasons. Steve Gonzo gives us a YouTube. I don't know what the YouTube is about, but I'll find out after. Steve says, but Doc, how do you really feel? Kay says, West Virginia and Kentucky are both very corrupt voting states. And Dia Swift says, it's racketeering, isn't it? DNC rigging and cheating. Dia says, where's Rand Paul's neighbor when you need him? Alana says, yeah, Rand Paul's neighbor. Steve says, here's what started the controversy. And he leaves another YouTube link. Sandy Deck says, wasn't that in the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington? Jimmy Stewart was doing filibusters, and he had to stand the entire time. Yeah, not only Jimmy Stewart, but the longest lasting one-person filibuster was by Strom Thurmond. He was filibustering the Voting Rights Act, and he stood up for 24 hours and 10 minutes until he had to quit, but they made him quit. There was later a 60-day filibuster. No, Strom Thurmond's, I'm sorry, was in 1957. There was a Civil Rights Act that was passed then. But in 1964, when they, in the run-up to the Voting Rights Act, there was a joint filibuster by many of the Republican senators, and by some Republicans, too, who joined it. And that filibuster took 60 days to break because there were a number of people yielding time to each other who were engaging in the filibuster. So they kept it going for 60 days, but it did not work. And Duchamp's Rook says, why are people so entangled in politics? It certainly appears people are losing sight of reality with all this partisan chatter. I don't know what to say about that. There are many, many people out there who don't have rent money, who don't have food money, whose whole lives are going to hell. It's not really about the parties. It's about the corporate people who want to deny much needed aid to people who are desperate and on their last legs. That's what it's about. And it happens to be the case that in this case, it's the Democratic Party, by and large, that's interested in helping those people. Okay, and a minority of Democrats and the majority of the Republican Party in both houses of Congress who are against it because it would make Biden look good, and they're against it for partisan reasons. So that's what's going on here. And Dia Swift says Biden halted Trump's cruel deportations via executive orders, and a court shot down the executive order. That's probably going to be appealed to a higher court. Because if Trump could order the deportations via executive orders, Biden could certainly halt those deportations with executive orders. I mean, one president's executive orders are not superior to another president's executive orders. In other words, a later president can always repeal the executive order of an earlier president. Lana says, we talk economics too. That's right. Dia says, people are not politically astute enough and intellectually lazy, and it's why we're enslaved to corporations, okay, and industries. Steve says, put those two sentences on a loop. Now, that appears to be true, but I have to recall to you all what it was like during the period of the populist party here in the United States in the 1890s and the early 1900s, and also the middle, okay, of the 1880s. People in most of the Midwestern states went out, rural people in farming states, and they listened to political speeches for hours on end to inform themselves and to support the populist party at that time, which was the party most interested in breaking the hold of the rich over the political system. And they went out, they listened to orators, to William Jennings Bryan, and for others like him. And they went on Saturdays, and they sat there while a politician gave a 90-minute speech or a 2.5-hour speech, and they learned. They learned about a complicated political platform. So they were not inherently intellectually lazy and inherently opposed to learning. They wanted to learn, and they did learn, and they had an appetite for learning. And they had roughly the same genetic heritage we have. We can break the intellectual laziness. We can get people to learn again. We can get them to listen again. We can get them to turn off the television if that's what's necessary. Someday, they will again make the connection between politics and whether they get screwed or not. And they'll get out there and they'll do something about it. So Dolores Pierce says, unfortunately, 4-year theater ahead, the media and corporation will continue selling fear of bogeyman Trump for dollars and ratings. We the people can't get stuck in the games. We lose as they kick the can of our needs down the road. I don't know what you mean by get stuck in the games, but I know if we could mount a campaign against the filibuster now and pressure those centrist Democrats to be willing to vote but for the nuclear option. And if we could nuke the filibuster, it'll be a lot easier to try and get the kind of relief we need from COVID at this point. Something can be done. It won't be everything we want. The Biden administration will never do that. But we can get some of what we want, some progress with respect to the climate, some stimulus checks, Probably not Medicare for all because Biden is too arrogant and too stubborn. But even then, if there's momentum going forward, if we're getting a lot of other things, if more and more people are coming into politics because we show them that it does make a difference, then maybe we can even get a Medicare for all passed through the Congress by 2023 on Biden's desk with the support of almost the whole Democratic Party. He will not fail to sign it then. Dia Swift said, can we have COVID vaccination in alternative parts of the body? I don't want it in the arm. Okay, does anyone know? Sorry. Okay, I don't know. I know that we got ours in our shoulder. There was hardly a reaction. Supposedly, okay, according to my doctor today, my Kaiser doctor today, we happened to talk to her, okay, by phone. And she said the experience so far at Kaiser is the older people are, the less of reaction they actually get to the vaccination, okay, at least the first vaccination. But she said thus far that seems to be Kaiser experience with the second as well. Okay, the second is usually more serious than the first, but evidently for older people it's not that serious either, which also made us feel good because, of course, we're looking forward to our second shot. And Dolores says, had Trump not run, the sicko favorite of the Republicans was Ted Cruz. I know. A smart sicko, or a smarter sicko. Dia Swift says, oh, yeah, says here Leahy is back home after brief hospitalization, Politico reporting. Does he have anything wrong with him? Or is he just overtired? But Dolores says the D.C. problem is the prosecution is also full of corrupt crooks with decades of power. Everyone has to watch their backs as they press charges against Trump. Dia Swift says, how about the chatter is that insurrectionists may be acquitted because they don't want to overwork the judicial system? You can't make this shit up. I don't know about that chatter. I don't think I believe that chatter. I think the insurrectionists are not going to be acquitted. Steve says, I really need some sleep. Good night, you guys. Sweet dreams. Good night, Steve. And Dolores says, Biden needs to get the 2K stimulus passed ASAP if they want to keep in power. I agree. He's got to keep his promise. It was a bold promise. I mean, the people in Georgia are going to remember this, and they're going to take it out on Warnock, on poor Reverend Warnock. They're going to take it out on him. John Ossoff is in there for 6 years, so he might be able to stay in place, especially if they elect a terrible Republican instead of Warnock in 2022. But if Biden and Schumer want to keep that Senate seat that they worked so hard to get, they damn better get that 2K stimulus passed. Kay says, night, Steve. Steve Gonza says, nuke the filibuster. Joanne says, federal job guarantee, FJG. And Diaz says, Pennsylvania GOP pledges full allegiance to Trump, but via Politico. Well, that's going to be interesting. That's going to be interesting. I don't think they're going to make it in Pennsylvania again, but we'll see. We'll see. I think Pennsylvania might be wising up. I hope so. Anyway, that's it, folks. Been on for 2 hours and 18 minutes. Went through a lot of stuff for you. Hope you liked it. And I'm going to see you again tomorrow night at roughly 9 o'clock. I expect it's going to be at 9 o'clock. So take care of yourselves. Don't take any unnecessary risks. And Laura says, thank you and night all. Sandy Dagg says, good night, everyone. Good night to you, Sandy. And we'll see you soon. I'll see if I can get a short take or two out tomorrow, but I have a compressed day. So take care. We love you, Kay. Good night.